for Nietzsche, what was the meaning of life? Like, what was his worldview? What did he think the purpose of human existence was? That's kind of what we want to unpack, because I think we'll see his thoughts have transferred into a lot of people's thoughts today, and they share a similar worldview to him. First, the groundwork of Nietzsche's worldview, the groundwork of the kind of what he thought about the meaning of life, is his hypothesis that God is dead.
Right. So this is a metaphysical claim.
Right.
So God is dead. What does that imply? Well, that implies a whole lot, because in his view, if God is dead, then the pillar of civilization has kind of been stripped from its core.
The ground of truth, the ground of objective moral values.
Scientific revolution has failed.
The organizing principle of all of society, really, for thousands of years. The Christian God in particular, he's saying, is dead. That it's no longer possible to believe in this Christian God. And why is he saying that? Okay, so we got to think about the historical context in which he was living. So he's living after things like, firstly, the scientific revolution. Well, I'd say first the Protestant Reformation.
I think that's important.
Right. So Protestant Reformation, Christendom, Christianity, which had provided the basis of civilization ever since really the time of, Constantine and like the 300s, right?
Yeah.
And the fabric of society had been Christian for all along, and it was unified, right? There was only the Catholic Church. And then this splintering begins to take place in the Protestant Reformation. And now the unity and the coherence of the Christian faith is called into question, because there's all these people disagreeing with each other. There's people breaking off into different branches. And then there's like wars of religion breaking out after a while, right? People are fighting.
French Revolution.
I mean, chaos is ensuing, and it's all over these disputed claims of religious belief. So what comes after the Protestant Reformation? Well, the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution.
Yep.
And one of the things that the Enlightenment thinkers hated was all this religious conflict that they grew up in the midst of, right? They grew up watching people kill each other over dogmatic beliefs, Protestants and Catholics, right?
And in their view, these debates were ineffective. And ultimately, what they ended up deciding was, look, all these claims about what's really true about God, all these metaphysical claims about heaven, about Jesus, about God, about Christianity, they're not really what's important. Right.
These Enlightenment thinkers thought what's actually important is thinking about the world in a rational way, and then also living a morally upright life.
Right.
So, and by the way, I think that in and of itself is a common attitude today.
Right.
Right. So like, how many Christians do we know? I meet Catholics and Protestants all the time who will say things like, I go to this church over here, but it doesn't really matter because we're all basically the same.
Yeah.
Which, okay, like, what's your reaction when you hear something like that?
To be honest with you?
Yeah.
I think it's a really weak stance, because either you live the faith that you say that you adhere to, or you don't. That's my personal stance. That being said, I can see how people do that for the sake of unity.
Yeah, and I think, most of these people are genuinely well-meaning.
Right.
They want to get along with people.
Yeah.
And
it's important that we get along with each other.
Right.
And it's important that we find common ground.
Right.
But I think obviously there's some...
But it reflects this attitude that these absolute truths really aren't all that important. What's important is like how we behave, how we act, how we live, being a good person, right?
Don't steal from me. Don't hurt me.
Right.
Don't be aggressive towards me. Don't attack me. Don't insult me. And we'll be all right.
So this was kind of the attitude of the Enlightenment thinkers who came before Nietzsche. They were like, look, let's stop arguing about all these truth claims and let's just focus on living a good life, right? Organizing society rationally. Now we have science. It's helping us understand all these things about civilization. We can, with our own powers of reason, someone like Immanuel Kant would say something like this, with our own powers of reason, we can actually construct a world in which we're living according to reason, in which we're living a moral life. We don't need to ground our moral life in religious belief. We can ground it strictly in our rational capacity, right? So what's funny about that, though, is these Enlightenment thinkers, as they're articulating the moral system by which everyone should live, they're articulating the Christian moral system.
Even the founder of modern philosophy, Descartes.
Yeah.
Right? So Descartes had argued that we need to be objective thinkers, detach ourselves from all sensate abilities, and just think rationally.
Mm-hmm.
But his conclusion was we can rationally achieve knowing God, which then informed the rest of his work. All that to just affirm what Joey's saying. Like, the Christian way of living and the Christian way of thinking still was deeply embedded with the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment thinkers, and even the modern thinkers.
Yeah, so what they did was they kicked out the foundation of Christian morality, attempting to just build a strictly rational morality. But everyone was so inculcated into this Christian way of life because they had lived in Christendom for so long that they took it for granted that, like, oh yeah, you should love your enemy. Yeah. Or like, you took it for granted that, oh yeah, you should serve the poor, right? You should be merciful. That was
you shouldn't murder.
Right. That was just in the air because people had been Christian for so long that the Enlightenment thinkers saw this as rationally self-evident, even without the Christian faith. What Nietzsche says is, when he comes along and he's seeing all this, and he's like, hey guys, this moral system that you've built, it doesn't have a foundation, right? God is dead. And so all these moral principles that you're outlining in a supposedly purely rational way, they actually don't make any sense.
Because the reason you're holding on to is deeply Christian.
Yeah, you're still living as Christians, even though you're attempting to claim that the fundamental truths of Christianity don't matter anymore or aren't necessary for the way that you're living.
Right.
So Nietzsche's calling these people out as basically hypocrites. Like, you're living this moral life, claiming that it's purely rational, but it's actually built on a Christian God who you claim isn't relevant anymore.
And I think it's important that we read the full quote of God is dead, because it helps build on the fact that, right, so people have interpreted God is dead in different ways. Some people have interpreted it in the affirmative, right? In other words, Nietzsche is saying, God is dead.
Hooray.
Hooray, cheering this reality that he's analyzing. But some people have also interpreted it negatively, as like he's mourning this loss. And I think that's the way we want to interpret it. And I think this quote brings that to light. I want to read it to you all. He reads, God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How should we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Is not the greatest of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it?
Yeah, so God is dead and we have killed him, right? With our rational pursuits, we've undermined Christianity. What Nietzsche thinks is we've basically revealed that the Christian God is a fairy tale.
I think it's kind of prophetic. Right, it's kind of prophetic at the time. The Christian church was deeply suffering.
Yeah,
as you had mentioned, right? The Reformation had happened, French Revolution has happened, and now the Enlightenment is over here attacking the church as well. He's like, "Hey, look, this whole Christendom thing. Let's just recognize that it's no longer here." But that implies a lot of things, friends.
Right,
More than just build this other scientific system.
And this is why I think Nietzsche. Bishop Barron, Jordan Peterson, they'll read this as precisely that, a cry of despair. Like, Nietzsche is not saying, yay, God's dead, we've killed him. He's saying, guys, look, God is dead. And that means that there is no longer any ground, any standard, any objective moral value for the way that we've just been living in a way that we think is normal for the last 1,000 years, right?
And we're just trying to justify our existence by holding on to these things that we have now discarded somehow.
Yeah, if there is no God, then why the heck should we actually serve the poor, right? If there is no God, then why in the world would we show mercy, right?
Why in the world should we care about the lowly?
Yeah, exactly.
The marginalized.
Yeah, I mean, so all of these what had become basic moral understandings, Nietzsche's calling into question, because he's like, look, without God, that actually doesn't follow.